In the system of nature, man, homo phenomenon, animal rationale, is a being of slight importance, and shares with the rest of the animals as offspring of the earth an ordinary value, pretium vulgare. Although man has, in his understanding, something more than they, and can set himself purposes, even this gives him only an extrinsic value, for his usefulness, pretium usus. That is to say, it gives one man a higher value than another, that is, a price, as of a commodity in exchange with these animals as items. So he still has a lower value than the universal medium of exchange, money, the value of which can therefore be called preeminent, pretium eminens. But man regarded as a person, that is, as the subject of a morally practical reason, is exalted above any price. For as a person, homo noumenon, he is not to be valued merely as a means to the purposes of others, or even to his own purposes, but as a purpose in himself. That is, he possesses a dignity, an absolute inner worth, by which he exacts reverence for himself from all other rational beings in the world. He can measure himself with every other being of this kind, and value himself on a footing of equality with them. Immanuel Kant. I've spent more than a year now going through all aspects of Kant's moral philosophy. I talked in many lectures about Kant's ethics, as well as about Kant's philosophy of right. And I'm now at the end of this and want to close this off. But there's one more topic I briefly want to address. Because so far, I have always focused on morality in regards to human beings. How do we treat others? And also, how do we treat ourselves? Because for Kant, there is also a moral duty towards myself. I have a lecture where I explain this further. But of course, human beings are not the only beings. And the topic of how to treat animals was at the very best an afterthought in Kant's time, in the 18th century. But nowadays, it has grown more of a concern. At least for some people, for a significant number of people. There's much more talk nowadays about the protection of animals, even about rights animals may have. There are people wanting to protect animals, there are people that are vegetarian or vegan, and those might be interested in when it comes to moral philosophy and the question how to treat animals. And here we find that Kant's moral philosophy is often criticized today. Now, there are certainly other criticisms that have nothing to do with animals. And there are some criticisms that were voiced already in Kant's own day. And such criticisms I addressed in other lectures on Kant's moral philosophy, wherever it was fitting. But the question of how to treat animals, as I said, was not so important for most people in the 18th century. So this is a criticism of Kant's moral philosophy that was not voiced in his own day. This is a criticism that you will not find much of in older works. I mean, you have someone like Schopenhauer caring for animals who would criticize Kant for that, but mostly this is a criticism that has grown more prominent in recent times. but it is one I want to address. Now, for the most part, it is just based on a morality of pity and compassion, saying, well, animals are sentient beings too. They can feel, pain, and so people don't like hearing that Kant said animals are items or things, if you want to translate it like that, um, because they think that this is Kant saying, well, they are unfeeling objects. It doesn't matter what you do to them. You can do with them whatever you want. Now, if this was all the criticism there was, I wouldn't care much for it because it would have no philosophical merit. It would not need to be taken seriously. Compassion, any sort of sensitivities, feelings is not a basis for morality. And this sort of morality I already dismissed in previous lectures. I had a lecture about why the good heart and compassion cannot be a fundament for morality. So I would not need to come back to it specifically for animals. But there's also criticism of Kant that runs a little deeper than that. Namely, Kant is accused of being anthropocentric. And Kant even sometimes is accused with his rationalism because people misunderstand it, because people don't really know what reason actually is. He's misunderstood as being a proponent of what you could call instrumental reason. That reason that does not give us the purpose, but only thinks about the means of reaching a probably unreasonable, irrational purpose. And of course, it is precisely this instrumental reason which is currently destroying nature and our environment and the fundament of us living on this planet. And these accusations, they are more concerning. They are also more concerning because they lead certain people, particularly people who care about animals or who care about the environment, who care about nature, to immediately dismiss Kant because they will just hear, oh, he was anthropocentric, he considered animals items, his morality was only about humans, and he was saying that everything non-human could just be used as a commodity, basically. So he is someone who is responsible for, who is a proponent of this current exploitation of nature. And so these people will turn away from Kant based on such misunderstandings, on such prejudices, without having studied him and having considered what he actually says. Which is a shame because it is precisely here, when it comes to how we deal with nature, how we deal with the environment, when it comes to the current climate emergency, where Kant is very relevant and where we could learn a lot from Kant. And indeed, I have already shown in several of my previous lectures, or at least alluded to, that there's currently no greater Kantian in the public eye than Greta Thunberg. Not that she necessarily knows that she's a Kantian. I mean, I don't know. Maybe she does. Maybe she has read Kant at some point, but to my knowledge, at least, she has never publicly talked about that. So I have no way of knowing. But it doesn't really matter whether she's aware of it or not. Her morality, her principles, the fact that she even has principles, that she has character and courage and integrity, her whole behavior are very much in line with Kant and Kant's morality. And of course, she does care about the environment, and of course, she is a vegan, which should be an indicator that maybe there is a lot to learn from Kant when it comes to how we deal with nature, and maybe being a Kantian in the moral sense actually does not have to mean exploiting nature or being careless with nature at all. But before I want to address what Kant has to say about how to deal with animals, how to treat animals, I want to first use this opportunity to talk about what even are animals to Kant. What is the nature of the animal? So, before going into practical philosophy, I want to briefly venture into theoretical philosophy. Kant never talks about this systematically. There's no specific text of his on the nature of animals. But at several points in his texts and lectures, he makes scattered remarks about the nature of animals that you can piece together if you read everything. And that is precisely why, before doing these lectures, I first studied all of Kant, all 29 volumes of his collected works, precisely to be capable of doing such a thing. Of not just talking about the main topics, but also things that Kant only mentions here and there. And if you're only interested in the moral question and not in the nature of animals, you might skip this part of my lecture. So I do think it is important for two reasons. First off, of course, the moral question, how to deal with animals, depends on first what you think their nature is, right? Questions such as do animals feel pain? Do animals have a consciousness? Do animals have reason or an intellect? Do animals have souls? How you answer these questions might very much influence how you think animals should be treated. And then, on the other hand, this has nothing to do with the moral question how to treat animals, but just if you want to understand Kant's philosophy as a whole and what he has to say about the nature of the human, then maybe it can be helpful to bring back to memory what I said in earlier lectures about our human mind, our human nature, or maybe to better understand it. It can be helpful to study what Kant has to say about the nature of animals, and through this shine light on what he has to say about human beings and about how our human cognition works. So let's get into the nature of animals. First off, animals to Kant are, of course, living beings, just like humans. And what this is specifically, I will not discuss here in this lecture. When I get to what Kant has to say about natural science eventually, I will also get to what he has to say about biology and what he has to say about what even is life. What does it mean for being to be a living being? But Kant would say that living beings have some sort of mind. Now, mind, the German word he uses is Gemüt, which is hard to translate, but maybe the best translation, maybe better than to translate it as mind, would be psyche. So the psyche. And the psyche is threefold. There is the faculty of cognition. then there is the feeling of pleasure and displeasure. And last, there is the faculty of desiring. This is something I discussed already previously, for example, my lecture on the project of the critique of reason. Of course, there I discussed it with the focus on human beings. But Kant ascribes these three faculties to all living beings, it seems. So he ascribes them to God. God has cognition, he has a feeling of pleasure. Of course, for God, there's no displeasure. And God wants something, and Kant also ascribes these three faculties to animals. But when it comes to these three faculties, each of them can be sensual or it can be intellectual. And again, the difference I discussed in the lecture on the project of the critique of reason. But basically, sensuality by Kant is defined as receptivity. So if I receive certain representations, if I am affected by something and that causes a representation in my mind, in my psyche, then I am sensual. So sensuality is passive in a way, while the intellectual faculties, they don't have receptivity, they have spontaneity or self-activeness, as Kant would say. So when you take the faculty of cognition, for example, when you see the color red or you taste the taste of sweetness or whatever, this is caused by you being affected by some object. Or when you go to the faculty of the feeling of pleasure and displeasure, if you cut yourself with a knife, this causes the feeling of displeasure. This causes pain. So here you receive a certain representation. And likewise, when you go to the faculty of desiring, when you have a desire, let's say, for food, this is caused by your physiology. This is caused by your body needing food and making you feel hungry. So here you are being a sensual being. While on the other hand, going back to the faculty of cognition, if you yourself come up with a concept, come up with an idea, a thought, something you think about, this is not simply caused by something, this is something you yourself bring forth. Or as for feelings, the pleasure you take in the beautiful, for example, comes, it's not like sensual pleasure, like a good taste or like a sexual pleasure, but rather it comes through a judgment, through you yourself thinking, this thing I think is beautiful. This thing I think in its form is purposive, even if I cannot name its purpose. But precisely that means what is beautiful, I also discussed in its own lecture. Or when it comes to the faculty of desiring, then you have morality, right? You can think about what you should do, and you can do something that you don't desire as a sensual being, that you are not driven to by your instincts, maybe quite the opposite. Maybe you are doing something dangerous, maybe you are standing up to injustice, maybe you are sacrificing yourself to save others, but because you think about it and come to the conclusion that it is the right thing to do. So there can be the sensual and the lower faculty, or there can be the intellectual, the higher faculty. And the special thing about humans, to Kant, is that we have both. But you can also only have one of them. So when it comes to God, Kant would say he has these three faculties of mind or of psyche, but only the higher ones, only the intellectual ones. So God is only self-active. He can think what he wants. He can cause his own pleasure, his own eternal happiness. He can want through wanting. He can want what is good, but he's never passive. He is never affected by something, and that something never causes certain representations without him being able to help it. Well, when it comes to the animals, it is precisely the other way around to Kant. So he says they have no thinking faculty, they have no higher, no intellectual faculty, they are only sensual beings. So they do have cognition and feeling and desires, but never self-active, spontaneous ones, never ones that they themselves walked forth, but only ones that are caused in them, only ones where they are passive in a way. So let's go through these three faculties and see what this means specifically. Let's first start with the faculty of cognition. So the animals just have the sensual side of this, the lower faculty. And what this entails for the human being, I discussed in my lecture on sensuality and on time and space as forms of viewing. So for one, sensuality means having a sense to Kant. And the sense is that through which we receive. We receive certain representations. Now, the sense in general by Kant is divided into an outer sense, through which we receive sensations from the outside world, and the inner sense, through which we sense what is happening in our own psyche, our thoughts and feelings and desires. And Kant says that the animals don't have an inner sense. So in a way, they don't sense themselves. But they have an outer sense, of course. And the outer sense, in turn, when it comes to human beings, Kant divides into several more senses. So to him, there is a general vital sense that, so to say, lets us sense the whole vitality of our body. And then there are organ senses that are tied to specific organs. The classical five senses, the sense of seeing, of hearing, of tasting, of smelling, of touching. And Kant says, while animals do have outer sense like we, it is, of course, not the exact same outer sense. So specific senses might be stronger or weaker. So, for example, many animals, of course, can smell better than we, or they might have better eyes than we do. And also, they might have different senses altogether. They might lack something, like maybe certain animals cannot see at all. But also, they may be able to sense things that we don't. Not just sense things that we do sense to a stronger degree, but sense altogether different things. So Kant already discusses the possibility that certain birds, certain migrating birds, might be able to actually sense the magnetism of the Earth, which we as humans know is there, but cannot sense. But in general, it is still the same things for animals and humans. We both have an outer sense, so we both have this receptivity or passivity. We both are affected by things, affecting our sense. Even if the specific sense and what we can or cannot sense might differ. The central faculty of cognition is not limited to the sense, though. It also includes a power of imagination, productive and reproductive power of imagination. And this Kant says the animals also have. Which of course fits with the fact that nowadays we know that animals can even dream, right? Dreams, according to Kant, are produced by our power of imagination, which, while the sense gives us representations of that which is actually there and affecting us right now, the power of imagination can sort of conjure images of central things that are not there right now, that maybe we sensed in the past. But of course, the interesting question when it comes to Kant's philosophy is, do animals have forms of viewing? Again, what that specifically is, I talked about in my lecture on sensuality. But basically, this is one of the main points of Kant's whole critical philosophy, that he says the senses as such give us only sensations or impressions, like red or salty or hard or loud or rose smell or whatever. But this is not yet a perception. This is not yet an actual image of an actual thing. This is just a chaos of sensations. And Kant says what we don't sense are time and space, because time and space are not things outside in the world that we just sense or perceive or experience, but rather they are our forms of viewing, creations, so to say, of our power of imagination. So I imagine the sensations, for example, the colors that I see, in space. I see the colors in space. I see spatial extended colored objects. And I cannot help but doing that. I have to view everything I view in time and or space. Space is the form of viewing of the outer sense. Time is the form of viewing of the inner sense. And since everything outside of me that I perceive is then inside of me, in my own mind, and is then perceived in me, right? I perceive what is in my own conscience, so to say. That means that the outer objects also, so to say, pass through the inner sense, which is why not everything is in space. Like my own feelings, my own desires are not in space, but everything that I view is in time. And again, this is, I explained this more in its own lecture, but this is one of the main discoveries of Kant. This is what his whole theory of transcendental idealism hinges on, that time and space are our forms of viewing, not something that exists in itself outside of us, independently of us, and is just experienced, but they are conditions of the possibility of experience, because we cannot experience anything except in these forms of viewing. Now, when it comes to animals, it seems, judging by some remarks Kant makes on the side, that he does assume that animals too view things in space. So that they too have not just sensations, but perceptions, and that they too have this form of viewing that is space. But since, according to him, they have no inner sense, they lack the form of viewing that is time. So that would mean animals do perceive things spatially, but they have no sense of time, which is something that you can certainly observe when it comes to lower animals, right? Like we all know how it is when a fly bothers you. You wave your hand to drive the fly away, and this works for a second. I mean, the fly does perceive the hand and reacts to this object moving in its direction, threatening it. But the fly seems to immediately forget that and come back as if you never drove it away in the first place. But that is the central faculty of cognition. What animals don't have is the intellectual faculty of cognition, is the thinking faculty. So they don't have an intellect, they don't have a power of judgment, they don't have reason. And the intellect, I discussed it in its own lecture, the intellect to Kant is the faculty of concepts. So of thoughts, you could say. A concept to Kant is the thought of a certain rule by which we understand things, right? So when I think water, the concept is not the word, so it doesn't matter if I say water or Wasser or agua or su or whatever. The word is just sort of a symbol representing the concept. But when I think water, I think a certain rule that applies to every object which falls under the concept of water. So I think, for example, H2O molecules, and I think that water turns to ice when it gets cold and then it expands. Or I think that water can vaporize at 100 degrees, and so on and so on. And these animals don't have. Animals don't have concepts. They therefore don't understand anything. They just react to sensations. Now, of course, someone could argue against this, saying, well, but animals are certainly capable of telling a difference between things, right? Like the cow in the barn does not walk against the wall, but rather it walks outside the open door. And likewise, when the cow is outside, the cow will eat the grass, it will not eat the stone. So it seems to be able to tell the difference. But Kant says this does not imply having a concept of, for example, a door, thinking and understanding that a door is a thing in a wall that can open in order to create a passage to go outside. But rather it is enough that the animals just react to different sensations, right? The grass has a different color, has a different smell than the stone, and it is not required that the animal really consciously thinks that the grass is different. So the animals have no concepts, Kant would say. And since the animals lack an inner sense, and since they lack the faculty of thinking, the animals have no real I, no proper self. Now, in a way, you could say that maybe they have a sensual I, but that would only be the receiving I, but they don't have an intellectual, a self-active I. So Kant does say that animals have apprehension, but that is, I also gave a lecture about the apprehension. Basically, Kant says that the sensations that we receive through the sense, the colors, the smells, the sounds, the tastes, whatever, they are taken up, they are being apprehended by the power of imagination, which forms them into one image in space and time. And that is then a perception. That is then something that is more than a mere sensation. That is an image we can perceive. And this apprehension the animals do. And in that sense, they have an apprehending self. But what they don't have is the apperception. Apperception I also discussed in its own specific lecture. Apperception is basically self-consciousness to Kant. Or it is the act of thinking through which self-consciousness creates itself, you could say. Apperception means that our consciousnesses, you could say. So, right, we are conscious of different things, that they are not disconnected, but rather they get connected with one another and with me. They get connected with one another by connecting them with me, by thinking that they are all my consciousness, right? So I can perceive a stone that feels warm under my hand, and I can perceive the sun shining on the stone. Now, I can be aware of the first, I can be aware of the second, but this could be two completely disconnected representations in my consciousness. But I connect them. I say that I who perceives the warm stone and I who perceives the shining sun is the same I. They are both my perceptions. And so I can connect them. I can say there's a causal connection. The sun is what made the stone warm. Kant famously says that the I am, I think, must be able to accompany every thought or every representation I have. Not that I always consciously think it, but I could, right? Instead of saying there is a tree here, I could always say I perceive a tree here. Instead of saying there's a dog barking, I could say I hear, I perceive a dog barking. And this apperception the animals are lacking. And therefore they are lacking the intellectual I. They have no self-consciousness. I explained in the lecture on perception, and I came back to this on many other lectures, that Kant, when it comes to human beings, always differentiates between the homo phenomenon, that is the sensual human being, and the homo noumenon, that is the intellectual human being, that is not sense, that is not appearing in the sensual world, that is not a phenomenon, but rather that can only be sought. So our humanity as such, our being rational and thinking beings. And this homo phenomenon is how the human appears, both outwardly with a sensual body, but also inwardly, how he appears to himself through his own psyche, through his own thoughts and feelings and so on. This homo phenomenon is, or his psyche is, what is the object of empirical psychology. But the homo noumenon, that is our true inner humanity, that is what gives us worth, what gives us dignity. The fact that we are rational, autonomous, free, responsible beings. And so you could say that the animals may have an I in the sense of the homo phenomenon. They may have a certain empirical character, you could say. They may have a certain psyche, and here they might differ from one another, right? Like we would say that maybe different dogs or different cats have different personalities, different characters. And here they might have certain psychological qualities, even to the degree that they can have mental issues just like human beings, right? Like an animal that is traumatized, for example. But there's always only this empirical, this appearing, this self that you can experience. But there is no inner self in itself. There is no self for the animal itself. The animal is not conscious of itself. And that is really all the difference there is to Kant between humans and animals. He does stress that biological humans are, of course, an animal species, that they also have animal instincts and so on. And if you would take the self-consciousness, the self-awareness away, and reduce the human being to just his sensuality, just his instincts, he would just be an animal species amongst others, not more different from animals in total than one animal species is from another animal species. But this one quality, this I, makes all the difference. This is enough to lift the human being into a completely different state and a completely different value. So Kant says, for example, if the horse was able to say I, to have a sense of self, then I would have to get down from its back and treat it as my equal. So then riding the horse would be a crime, would be a degradation of the horse's dignity, just like you cannot take a human being and force him to carry you on his back. But since the horse cannot say I, and it's not about the actual saying, like, of course, a human being who has speech problems is still a human being. But since the horse cannot think of itself as an I, as a self, um, it has no dignity. It is an item, and it can be used as an item. It can pull your carriage, or it can carry you, and so on. And this is not a crime. But going on to the second faculty, the feeling of pleasure and displeasure. I gave a lecture on pleasure and pain where I explained that to Kant there are three kinds. There is the sensual pleasure, the pleasure we take in the pleasant, like food or sex or whatever. And then second, there is the aesthetical pleasure, the pleasure we take in that which is beautiful or sublime. So in something that is not pleasurable to our senses, but to our judgment. It is a sort of mixed pleasure because it does require the intellect, it does require judgment. This is beautiful, this is sublime. But we are judging something that we view sensually. And of course, if we had no senses, we could not view anything beautiful or sublime. And then lastly, there is the intellectual pleasure, the approval of the good. So something that does not affect my senses at all, but I think about it, and in my thinking, I come to the conclusion that it is good. So if I were to hear that world peace has been declared, essentially my situation would not change. I mean, maybe for someone who's right now in a war, if the bombs stopped falling, sure. But for me, who is far away from war, nothing would change essentially. I would not feel better in my body, but I would judge peace to be a good thing, and so I would be happy about it. Of these three kinds of pleasure, the latter two, since they require an intellect, are unknown to the animals. Animals cannot approve of something that they judge as good, and animals also don't know the aesthetical liking of the beautiful or of the sublime. Especially this I consider important as an argument, because nowadays there's a lot of relativism. There are many people that will want to tell you that human beings are also just animals. There is no difference essentially between humans and animals. And they will try to explain everything that is specifically human through sensuality. But here you have something that is hard to find in the animal kingdom, right? Animals can, of course, take pleasure in things that we find beautiful, but not because they find them beautiful. It's sense pleasure in their case, right? So sure, insects might be drawn to beautiful flowers, but they are drawn there for food. Sure, birds might be drawn to other birds that have beautiful feathers or that sing beautifully, but they are drawn there for mating. But actual beauty is about a disinterested well-liking of something merely for its purposive form, without it affecting your senses in a pleasurable manner. I explained this further in my lecture on the beautiful. And this is something you won't find. You won't find an animal simply enjoying a sunset or a rainbow or whatever. And also the sublime. It is also, I discussed in its own lecture, but it is a special pleasure, that this pleasurable shiver and being in awe, you could say, that we feel, for example, in front of a stormy ocean or a great canyon or the starry sky above us. And this is a certain feeling that nature as such overwhelms us. As sensual beings, we are small and insignificant and powerless, but this precisely lets us realize that we are more than just sensual beings, that with our intellect, with our freedom, we are actually more than nature, and nature is nothing against us. And since the animals lack this latter thing, they would only feel overwhelmed, right? That's why, as a human being, you might stand by the window and look outside when there's a storm and thunder and take a certain pleasure in that. But the dog will probably just whine and hide under the table. So animals don't know the beautiful or the sublime. What they do have is sense pleasure. So something affecting their senses and feeling good or feeling bad, feeling painful. Of course, once again, how they are affected specifically, what is and isn't pleasurable to them, might differ when compared to human beings. So Kant says, for example, that to us, a dead, a rotting carcass is disgusting, but the crows seem to like it, while we would abhor the smell and the taste. But the fact that our senses are affected at all, and that the way they are affected causes us to want to keep or to want to get rid of that certain representation they cause, which is what being in pleasure or being in pain means to Kant, that is something we share with the animals. While animals, however, are capable of feeling pleasure and pain just as much as human beings, they are not capable of happiness and misery, Kant says, because these go beyond merely pleasure and pain, even beyond constant pleasure and pain. Because what does constant really mean if you have no sense of time? Rather, these need thinking, these need reflecting about your pleasure and pain, right? So, in a way, happiness means not just feeling pleasure, but also feeling pleasure at the fact that you are feeling pleasure. And misery means not just being in pain, but also feeling pain, feeling displeasure about the fact that you are in pain. And this sort of reflection only humans are capable of. So an animal might feel pleasure in the moment. It might eat something tasty. And maybe in the previous moments it has also felt pleasure. Maybe the animal is a well-kept pet that is constantly getting treats every day. But still, the animal will not reflect and say, hey, now I'm getting a treat that is tasty. Yesterday I got a treat. The day before I got a treat. Probably tomorrow I will get another treat. I am happy. I'm leading a good life. Rather, only we from the outside, looking at the animal, making a judgment about the animal, could judge this animal is leading a happy life or this animal is leading a miserable life. So for our judgment, it looks like that, but for itself, in its own eyes, the animal does not consider itself happy or miserable, which is an important point, which means when we are judging the degree of happiness or misery of a being, we cannot just go by physical feeling, right? This reminds me of Nietzsche's saying, I personally have no doubt that, by comparison with one painful night passed by one single hysterical chit of a cultured woman, the suffering of all the animals taken together who have been put to the question of the knife so as to give scientific answers, are simply negligible. And that's an important point, because nowadays, in our time of relativism and people constantly saying that animals and humans are essentially the same, which, by the way, always makes me suspect that these people, for them it must be true, right? They are unaufklärt people, meaning they have not really risen above their own animality. They have not really risen to humanity. And since they know only themselves, they will assume it's like this for every person. So, in a way, subjectively, they are right. They are like animals, maybe smarter animals, but still like animals. They are only driven by their instincts. They only know their sensuality. And so they are right to say that they are not different from animals. But what they are not aware of is that they at least have the potential to be more than animals. So in this relativistic time, you have many people that would say, "Oh, animals are suffering so much," and you get people pointing at the animals that we keep for our meat, right? Like the pigs, the chicken, and so on, that are basically imprisoned all of their lives, cramped together, leading terrible lives, to be sure. But also, without wanting to defend this, I mean, I am against this, but still, you mustn't consider it as if they were humans leading these lives. So you have some advocates for animals, some extreme vegans, let's say, that will say stuff like, "Oh, these are animal concentration camps," or "There's a chicken holocaust going on." And I don't know about wherever you live, but at least here in Germany, there are some people, of course, marginal people, but there are some people that say that, and that always leads to a big outcry. That always leads to other people saying, "How can you say that? You are relativizing the Holocaust. You mustn't compare this to the Holocaust." Now, this outcry as such, I don't take seriously at all. Whenever people are offended merely because of manners, not actual morality, just arbitrary social rules of conduct, whenever people say, "Oh, this you are not allowed to say, this mustn't be said," it is always dishonest, always. These are always immoral people that hide their immorality behind outer decency and decorum. And they should never be taken seriously when there is such an outcry. And especially in this particular case, when they complain about people allegedly relativizing the Holocaust, I mean, we have seen in the recent years, especially here in Germany, how that very attitude, that very argument, "Oh, the Holocaust is this absolute evil and you mustn't compare it with anything at all. It is outside of history. It is singular and therefore we cannot learn from it. And if you are daring to learn from it, then you are already relativizing it, and then you are already committing a crime, essentially." We have seen how this very attitude leads precisely to people allowing and even supporting and defending another Holocaust. And yes, I'm actually not saying genocide here. I'm consciously saying Holocaust in Gaza. Holocaust survivors have called it a Holocaust, like Stephen Kaposh or Marione Ingram. So I think I'm well within my rights to say that too. And maybe we need to stop talking about the Holocaust so much and go back to talking about Holocausts more. But that aside, this outcry can be dismissed immediately, but still, I would criticize such defenders of animals talking about the chicken Holocaust or pig concentration camps or whatever. I would criticize them on different grounds, not on manners or whatever, but rather I would say just taken from the sensual side, they do have a point. I mean, if we just take how it looks, we have, if we free ourselves from prejudices and from any, oh, you mustn't say that, that's not allowed to say, if we are just somber about it and unprejudiced, then we have to agree that in both cases you have industrialized killing of millions of living beings. And we have to agree that if humans were to be treated like we treat pigs or cows or chicken in this mass farming, then this would be a terrible crime against humanity, no doubt about it. But you cannot just look at it from only the sensual side. You have to acknowledge that it is not human beings treated like that, it is animals. And surely they are suffering. I mean, it's certainly not fun for the pigs to be cramped together in a way too small space, to live all their life in the dark, to constantly be hurting each other, be chewing on each other's tails, and so on. But they are not suffering from the fact that they are suffering. They are not even aware there's another life, that there's light outside. They are not thinking, oh, this is wrong, I should be happy. They are not thinking, oh, yesterday was also terrible like today. Tomorrow is also gonna be terrible. My life is hell. They are not thinking this is unjust. Not just I want more, but I deserve more because I'm a being with dignity. All of that they are not thinking. And so, therefore, it is not the same. It is painful, but it is not misery. Only humans can experience actual misery. And so, since the animals do have such feelings, Kant is not saying that animals are not able to feel some sort of sympathy or compassion and act out of it. So animals might perform certain actions that seem to be moral actions. But the point is that they would only do them out of instinct, out of certain feelings of pleasure or displeasure. They would not do them because they have thought about it and come to the conclusion that these are good actions and that they approve of those actions. Which leads me to the third and final faculty, the faculty of desiring. And here also, Kant says what the animals do have is choice, but what they do not have is will. I gave a lecture on the faculty of desiring and on the difference between choice and will. Basically, choice to Kant is that faculty, as the name indicates, that lets us choose. Do I go left? Do I go right? Do I eat the apple? Do I eat the chocolate or whatever? And of course, animals can make choices. But the question is, what determines your faculty of choice to choose A and not B? To Kant, there needs to be something that drives us in one or into the other direction, which is what he calls the driving spring. And those can be either coming from sensuality or from our intellectual faculty, from our will. And in the case of the animals, the driving springs can only come from sensuality. So animals are driven by their instincts, by their sensual desires, but they cannot think about what should happen, what should be done, and can therefore not drive themselves. They therefore have no free will. To Kant, wanting, desiring, is always connected with pleasure, but there are two possibilities. Either the pleasure comes first and I want something because it brings pleasure, that is sensual desiring. So something tastes good to me and that's why I want to eat it. Or I'm hungry and because that is a sort of displeasure, a sort of pain that I want to get rid of, I want to eat. Or the other possibility is that the wanting, the desire comes first and the pleasure comes second. And that is the case in morality. So I first want something, for example, justice. I don't want it because it feels good to me, it brings me pleasure. Maybe doing the moral thing actually would bring me displeasure, right? If I stand up for justice in a despotic regime, I may get punished. So I'm not doing it because it brings pleasure. I'm doing it because I thought about it, I reflected on it, and I came to the conclusion that it is good, that it should be done. And therefore I want it. But since I do now desire it, now it will bring me pleasure when I get it. Because when I get what I desire, I get pleasure, right? So I will be happy when there is justice, when there is peace. In this latter case, we only have with humans, not with animals. For animals, the pleasure always comes before the desire. And so the desire is caused. Again, there's only sensuality, only receptivity. And so animals are instinct driven and have no free will. Which is precisely why to animals there's no morality. Again, they might in certain situations do good, seemingly selfless actions, but even those are done out of instinct. But all in all, the animal cannot think about what it should do. So if you have humans being shipwrecked, and there's a grown-up surviving on a small boat with a child, and they are running out of food, sure, the grown-up's stomach can rumble, he can be hungry, and so he might desire taking all the food for himself, or even killing the child and becoming a cannibal to survive. That is essential desire. And maybe some will act on it, but he can think about what he's about to do and come to the conclusion that this would be wrong. And he has the freedom to not follow his sensual desire. No matter how much his stomach hurts, no matter how hungry he is, he can restrain himself and choose to rather sacrifice himself so that the child can survive hopefully some more till the boat reaches some shore or whatever. The animal will probably not act like that. If you put a dog or a cat on a boat with one of its pups, and if it takes enough time and there's no other food, the animal will probably eat its own young eventually. So that is the difference to Kant. However, while the animals have only sensual desires, they cannot, through their intellect, cause their own moral desires, their own moral wants. Their sensual desires, Kant says, in a way have more regularity to themselves than ours. They are less in conflict with themselves. Precisely because they only have this one power, sensuality. They don't have two different faculties, sensuality and the intellect, mixing and getting in conflict with one another. Which is why animals have no passions. What passions specifically mean to Kant, I will soon discuss in its own lecture when I get to his philosophy of happiness. But he would say animals might have sensual desires, they might have inclinations, but they don't get passionate about their desires. And therefore, in a way, have a much easier life. So, an animal might want to mate with another animal, it might desire the other animal. But if this doesn't work out, like the other animal rejects it, or the other animal mates with a competition with some third animal, then this will probably not ruin the animal's life. The animal will probably in the end move on and try to find another mate and not think much on the mate it had before or it wanted to have. What will not happen is that the animal is so passionately infatuated that it is forever heartbroken, and it will not forever bemoan having lost the love of its life. It will not take its own life because it was rejected. It will also not try to kill the desired mate or the third animal that the other animal picked out of some mad jealousy or whatever. Or likewise, if you attack an animal, it might bite you back. But then, if you leave, and days and weeks and months and years pass, the animal will probably not think of you much. The animal will most likely not get into passionate hatred and think passionately about revenge and spend the next years cultivating resentment towards you and planning on how to take revenge or whatever. So the sensual desires of the animals, they don't turn into unhealthy passions like that, and therefore they cause much less problems. As a last point, Kant also does say that animals have souls, but soul here to him just means the supersensual animating principle that turns lifeless matter into something organic. I will discuss this further when I get to what he has to say about natural science. But he does say that everything organic, so not just the animals, even the plants, does need such an animating supersensual principle. That to him, however, does not prove that such a principle, such a soul, can also exist independently of the body that it is animating, and that it will continue existing once that body perishes. Might be, might not be, cannot be proven. Indeed, when it comes to the human soul, I discussed this in my lecture on rational psychology. Do we have an immortal soul, or are we just our brains? That Kant, in his critical philosophy, shows how the metaphysical arguments in favor of an immortal soul don't work, and how this cannot be proven even for human beings. When it comes to human beings, however, Kant says, while the immortality of the soul cannot be proven, there is a rational reason to believe in it. Not because of theoretical proof, but because of a practical, a moral argument to believe in it. This is something I will get to when I get to his philosophy of religion. Since for animals there is no morality, even this practical reason of believing in the immortality of their souls does not apply here. So we have no reason to believe that they will live on. That said, Kant personally does seem to have believed in that. He did believe that animals also will have a life after death. Still alive as animals, so there's no such thing for Kant as, for example, animals being reborn as humans eventually or whatever. No, in the afterlife they will still be animals and probably still serve us like they did in this life. But he did believe that their souls live on. But not because of any philosophical principle, not because his own philosophy could offer any reason to believe that, but simply because to him personally it seems to have been likely. Now, this is what Kant has to say about the nature of the animals. And of course, many people might criticize that, many people might dismiss that as very 18th century, and many might say that now we know better. Many would probably claim that thanks to the empirical behavioral studies of recent years, recent decades, we now know that animals, at least some higher animals like certain apes or dolphins or crows, are much closer to us than we assumed, right? You will hear stuff like how a dog is more clever than a little human child of, I don't know, 3-4 years. You will also hear that certain animals like apes or dolphins or crows do have a sense of self, which is usually claimed on the basis that they can recognize themselves in a mirror. And of course, now we know that at least these higher animals can be quite clever in solving problems, in using tools, and so on. And without a doubt, we now know more about what animals are capable of than we did at Kant's time. And without a doubt, he does think too little of animals' capabilities. So Kant does, for example, in his lectures, he relates stories of travelers that claim to have seen a dog that filled a jug with oil with stones until the oil had risen so much that the dog could lick it out of the jug, or that claimed to have seen a monkey keep open a clam with a stone so that he could get to the flesh inside. And Kant dismisses such stories as rather unlikely. So he does not think that the animals are capable of that. Here, of course, nowadays we know that at least some animals are capable of much more than Kant expected of them. And no doubt there's still more to be found as we keep studying animals. And no doubt some of these findings are quite amazing. But we should not simply be amazed by them. And we should not, just on the basis of being amazed how some animal uses tools or solves a problem or whatever, conclude, oh, the animals are essentially like us. Maybe there's a difference of degree. Maybe we are a bit smarter still, but there's no true difference of quality. The animals do have an intellect. They can think, maybe just not as good as we. No, here you see that a big issue is that people nowadays, and not just lay people, but including scholars, including scientists, lack a certain basic philosophical education and lack clear principles. So I'm not doubting that certain scholars or scientists do good and so empirical work, but their conclusions from that are just based on what they empirically experienced, and not on a true understanding of their own concepts. And so they may experience an animal solving a certain problem, and then they will say, oh, okay, so the animal can think, because they don't actually know what thinking is. And I wish that we would not just be in awe of animals recognizing themselves in mirrors or solving problems using tools, but rather that we would also focus on, and this is something we could learn from Kant's philosophy, on what having reason actually implies. What a being that is a rational being would necessarily have, would necessarily be capable of. Concepts and ideas, but also a feeling for the beautiful and the sublime, or also morality, and not just acts of compassion, of sympathy, but an actual sense of dignity and of duty, actual free will, even going against your own sensual desires out of a sense of morality. And I will just point out two important differences that point to animals not having an intellect, even when they do amazing things. The one is that amongst animals there seems to be, when they do something together, there seems to be no conflict about how to do it. So we don't have to think of higher animals even. Think of insects like bees or ants. Usually no one would be inclined to say that these can think, that these have an intellect like humans, yet still they do amazing things. The bees build their beehive together. Hundreds of bees work together to keep the colony alive, and the bees all do their respective tasks. Or likewise the ants, right? And consider certain ants that even do farming, right? Like these ants that cut off pieces of leaves to carry them into their place, and they cultivate certain mushrooms, certain fungi there. This is quite amazing, and if it was done by human beings, it would require intellect, to be sure. But these animals do it based on instinct, and one thing that points at that is, if hundreds of humans were to work together to, let's say, create a big building, there would be different opinions about how to build it, how it should look, who should do what, and you could only solve this by having someone in charge that the others have to listen to, or by maybe voting and going with what the majority says, but you would have to have some sort of mechanism of authority, and there could be conflicts, which is why we have politics as humans, right? We have different parties, different factions, because we cannot work together in groups without people having different opinions about what should be done and how it should be done, which is precisely because we can think, and in our thinking we can come to different conclusions. But the bees, since they all function on the same intellect, I have not heard of the bees having parties and factions, and the bees having actual political debates about how to best build the beehive. And the other thing is that with animals there is no progress. Sure, it's amazing how some animals can use tools, so clever the crows or certain apes can be. But they are still doing the same thing they have been doing thousands of years ago, right? The bees are still building their hives the same they did 1,000 years ago. The beavers are still building their dams the same they did 1,000 years ago. We humans are not building our buildings like we did 1,000 years ago. So we don't just use tools, we use technology, because again we have concepts, we have the sort of a rule that lets us understand nature. We understand according to which rules nature works, and therefore we can use these rules in our interest, and we can use these rules to improve upon the tools we use. And animals don't seem to do that. They also lack this pluralism that humans have. Since we think about things, since we have concepts, understanding of rules, we can communicate our insights to others, and others can build on that, right? It's not just one person developing everything, but rather technological scientific progress works through people building up in the work of others, and that's not something the animals seem to do. Which is precisely why, no matter how amazing their tool use, we should not just assume they have an intellect. What they actually can't do is a true deed. So a spontaneous act, something that is not caused by instinct, by nature, but something through which they bring something new into the world. Not being just a link in a chain of causation, but starting anew, starting their very own chain of causation. That's something the animals don't do. They don't do something truly unexpected. And so Kant says that animals don't have an intellect, they don't have reason. What they do have is what he calls an analogon rationis. So something that is analog to our reason, meaning animals can do certain things that we as humans could not do based on instinct. We could only do them through thinking about what we are doing. Again, like creating a beehive, right? You could not have hundreds of humans together building something, everyone knowing what he is doing, everyone doing his part, not getting into constant conflict with what others are doing, without humans thinking about it and making a plan and communicating it to one another, while the bees are following their instinct. But this analogon rationis is not actual ratio, not actual reason, and Kant says anything that humans could do hypothetically could also be done through a specific instinct. So Kant would say we now have animals that out of their instinct can use tools or can recognize themselves in the mirror. There would be nothing in the laws of nature, at least in theory, preventing an animal from having an instinct that makes this animal build a rocket that can fly to the moon, or a computer or whatever. I mean, this would also be no more amazing and no more surprising than what the bees or the ants are building in a way. And indeed, Kant does sometimes envision that maybe in life after death, animals will do just that. He says that in the afterlife, we as humans might not fundamentally change our basic nature, but our nature might be improved upon. So we might have an improved cognition. We might in the afterlife be capable of understanding things that now in this life, deeper truths about the universe, we could not hope to understand. And just like that, Kant says, it might be that in the afterlife, the animals, both in the bodies they have and also in the instincts they have, are improved. So their basic nature as animals would not change. They would not gain intellect. They would not gain a self. But this nature might be improved. And so Kant says, maybe the animals could serve us better than they do now in the afterlife. So he says, just like now they pull our carriages or plow our fields for us, maybe in the afterlife with improved bodies and instincts, they can build our cities for us. But still, even that, animals building houses, could be done through merely instinct, would not require actual rationality. Now, this image of the animals building our cities, building our technology merely on instinct in the afterlife might be a bit silly, and it comes pretty close to what Kant usually calls Schwärmerei, which you could translate as raving, which means going beyond the limits our reason sets for us, which is usually something he's against and dismisses. And this is one of the many instances, I've mentioned this in previous lectures already, where you can see that Kant as a person was behind Kant as a philosopher. He went very far and very deep with his philosophy, but as a person, he stayed behind that in a way. And as a person, in his more personal beliefs or opinions, he did not always completely follow his own philosophical insights and principles, but rather, in many instances, was still a person of his time, or still stuck with the opinions he had before his own critical philosophy, before he revolutionized philosophy. Fichte in this, like always, is much more consistent, and Fichte would much more than Kant insist that the animals, as everything in the sensual world, are appearances, not things in themselves. And so there is no more reason for us to assume that we will encounter the animal again in the afterlife. Then there's reason to believe that we will encounter the stone again in the afterlife. But anyways, This is what Kant says about animals and about their nature. They do not have an intellect, even if through an analogon rationis, through some sort of instinct, they might sometimes be capable of doing things that we can only do by using our intellect. But now that we are in the clear about animal nature, what about animal rights? Well, Kant says there are none. We have no moral duties towards the animals. Animals are items that you can use however you want. And this is precisely what he usually gets criticized for. This is precisely what people usually reject. They will say, oh, so he's saying an animal is an item like a car, so like I can destroy my own car, like I can take a baseball bat and bash in my own car if I feel like it. I mean, it would be a crime if I do it to another's car because I'm hurting his property, but if it's my own, I can do it. Just like that, I could bash in the animal with the baseball bat. That's what Kant is saying. But that's in fact not at all what Kant is saying. In fact, and I will get to this later, he would say not only should you not senselessly hurt the animal, you should also not senselessly destroy your car. That is also immoral. So even lifeless objects should not just senselessly be destroyed. But I will get to that. But the point is that this criticism of Kant is based on basic misunderstandings mostly. People just hear animals being called items or things, and the problem is that people usually assume that philosophers are talking as thoughtlessly as they are. So they just assume the philosopher uses the words just like they come to him. And they read a word in a philosopher and they will just assume that it means more or less what it would mean if they had used that word. But a proper philosopher probably is very conscious of his language and probably thinks about the meanings of words. Right? It's the same problem I talked about this in the lecture on beauty. Kant says the pleasure we take in the beautiful is a disinterested pleasure. And many people will say, oh, there is no such thing as disinterested pleasure. If it brings you pleasure, you will have an interest in it. Simply because they don't recognize what Kant specifically means by the word interest, what it means as a term in his terminology, where interest means specifically desiring the existence of the object. The same with item. Kant says that every being, so everything that exists, is either a person or an item. A person is a rational being, is a being with autonomy, and personality, I discussed that in previous lectures, like the one on rational psychology. Personality to Kant basically means unity with myself, and therefore accountability, right? If let's say I murdered someone 10 years ago, but I can still be held to account for that. I'm still responsible because the person who did that 10 years ago and the person who is me now are the same person. And I myself necessarily think of myself as the same person. I would say the me who is sitting here now is the same me who killed somebody 10 years ago. And this personhood is what gives us responsibility for our actions. Because I have unity through the different moments, so to say, of consciousness, because I can be held accountable for my actions, I am responsible. And whatever does not have this personhood is an item, is something that can be used by persons, but cannot itself be treated as a person, because it is not a person in its own eyes, right? We, looking from the outside at the animal, might say, oh, this is this specific animal. It's the same it was yesterday or 5 years ago. But the animal for itself does not think that way. It is one for us, the onlookers, but not one for itself, because it has no self. And based on this difference between persons and items, in Kant's philosophy of rights, there are also these different relations of right. And I made its own lecture about that. To Kant, there's the item right, the right I have when I own an item, for example, my house or my bike or whatever. And there's the personal right, the right I have not to a person I own, that would be slavery, that is wrong, but to certain actions of a person that the person might have promised me through a contract. And then thirdly, there's also the personal right in the manner of an item, where I own a person as if the person was an item, without, that's the difference to slavery, without actually making the person an item. That's, for example, the legal relation between parents and children to Kant. Again, if you want that in more detail, you can turn to the lecture on these different legal relations. But the point is that you have only these three. So our relation with the animals must fall under one of these three. And it cannot fall under the personal right. Because again, the animals have no accountability, they have no responsibility. And I would ask anyone who rejects Kant saying animals are just items, if then he really considers animals persons. Because again, there is no third possibility in Kant's thinking, and if you think that is wrong, if you think there must be something third added, then you would have to first somehow argue for that and justify that. Usually, people will not say animals are persons in the legal sense. Even the biggest animal rights activists, even the greatest vegans or whatever, they might say animals have rights that we should respect and revere, but they will usually not say that animals have duties and that they can be held accountable, right? They would say, oh, it should be possible to sue you if you abuse an animal, but they would probably find it as ridiculous as anyone else if I try to sue the dog that bit me, or if I try to sue the moth that eat holes into my clothes. And believe me, I would like to sue those guys, but clearly it would be ridiculous and absurd to do that. So if you agree with that, you basically admit that the animal is not a person. It cannot be a person in the legal sense. And if still you demand the animal to have rights, then what you are actually saying is that you want some sort of legal construct that and relation that does not exist elsewhere. because usually rights and duties come together. Usually I say, I have certain rights to not be harmed, to not be killed, meaning others have the duty to not harm me, to not kill me. But this comes also with me having the duty to not do this to others, because both hinges on the same thing, my personhood. Because I am a person, because I have freedom, I have autonomy, this freedom should not be taken from me. And because I am a person, because I have freedom, autonomy, I can be held accountable for using this freedom to harm others and to take their freedom from them. Animals don't have this freedom. They cannot be held accountable. But then that also means we have no duty to preserve this freedom and to not take from them what they don't have in the first place. So the point with the word item as a term in Kant's moral philosophy is not that he's saying animals are items or things, meaning they have no feelings, they don't hurt when you abuse them or whatever. But that is simply not relevant for Kant's moral philosophy. That's also not relevant when it comes to human beings. This I discussed in my previous lectures, for example, on the categorical imperative. Rather, what it means to call the animals items is precisely to say they are not persons, so they are not a purpose in themselves and for themselves. Since they don't have autonomy, they cannot set a purpose for themselves. They cannot say, this is my goal, this is what I want to do because I understood it to be good. Rather, nature gives them their goals. Their instincts drive them towards something. And since they cannot have a purpose for themselves, there can be no duty to respect that purpose, to revere this freedom of theirs. Rather, they can only be a purpose for another being, for a being that is rational, that does have autonomy, and that gives them a purpose, that says this horse is for riding, this dog is for protecting my property or whatever. And if you were to say that animals should not fall under the item right, but rather under the personal right in this legal framework of Kant, then you would have to be consistent. Then this would mean, okay, as other persons, animals have a right to not be killed, to not be abused. But it would also mean, as other persons, they must have a right to their freedom. They must have their dignity. So not only would it then be forbidden to kill animals, it would also be forbidden to buy animals, to put animals in cages, to put animals on leashes. And this is something, I mean, there might be some extreme animal rights activists that are against pets completely. But for the most part, even people who care about animals, even people who are vegetarian or vegan, don't see it as problematic that you keep an animal as a pet. They will not say putting the dog on the leash will be an attack to its dignity. I mean, again, we hear things like, oh, behavioral studies show that dogs can be smarter than children of a few years. And that might be true. I'm not doubting that. But still, everyone immediately senses that it's fine to put that dog, no matter how smart he is, on a leash. It's not fine to put even a 3 or 4-year-old child on a leash just like that, because that is against human dignity. And I already discussed in the lecture on these different legal relations, legal categories, that Kant says item right means that we have a right not towards an item, but to an item. But it is a right towards other human being in regard to the item. This means that, let's say I own a house, I have a right to that house. It means that actually it is other human beings towards whom I have this right. Having a right to the house means I have the right to tell others, don't enter my house. You cannot use this house for yourself because it's not yours, it is mine. I have the right to keep you away from it, and you can only enter it if I allow it. What it does not mean is that I have a right towards the house, right? I cannot, if the house somehow breaks down, I cannot sue the house. Or if I lose my key, I cannot tell the house, you must open the door for me. This is my right because I own you. That would be silly, of course. Which is why if you are alone without other human beings on a lone island, you have no rights to the items there. You cannot say these things are my property. You can say you have a negative right in a sense. You can say I do not have the right to use them because no one else has a right to them. They don't belong to anyone. So sure, I can pluck the coconuts there. I can cut down a tree to use the wood for making a fire. But I cannot say I have a positive right to do this because this tree is my property. I can just say it belongs to no one. Only the moment a second person gets on the island, then can we start talking about property. Then I can maybe say, okay, this half of the island should be mine, this should be yours. I have a right to all the items on this side, meaning you have no right to use these items without my permission. Well, anyone who feels uneasy about animals being called items, I would ask, do you really think an animal should legally be closer to a human being than, let's say, to the car? When a human being promises you a certain action through a contract and doesn't do it, you can sue him to compensate you. If you own a car, again, it means you have a right towards other human beings. If someone steals your car, sure, you can sue that person. But if the car on its own breaks down, or if the car rolls down a slope because the brakes don't work and you parked it on a slope, you cannot sue the car for not doing what you want. Well, now think about a dog. If you own the dog, sure, someone steals it, you can hold that someone accountable. But if the dog runs away on its own, or if the dog does not follow your command, do you really think you should be able to hold the dog accountable, to take the dog to court? You probably don't think that. Meaning you admit that the dog is an item legally. Again, this has nothing to do with stuff like, can it feel, can it be in pain? That's not philosophical thinking. You must be able to think in principles and to ask, what sort of legal relation do we have with this thing? Do we have the relation we have with a person? No, we have the relation that we have with an item. But so far I addressed only one side of the misunderstanding or the criticism. Okay, when Kant calls animals items, it is not a statement about how much they can feel or whatever. It is a specific term in his legal philosophy. But still, does it mean that Kant says we can do with them whatever we want and it is okay to abuse them? No, certainly not. There are several statements from Kant and also about Kant that show that this cannot have been his opinion. So, for example, he says explicitly that animals should not be abused and tortured, and that we should also make sure that children don't do this, right? That children don't, I don't know, pull the cat's tail or blow up frogs or tear out flies' legs and wings or whatever little cruelties children might do to animals. Because it says we must cultivate our feelings of sympathy and our compassion, which help our morality. Now, morality should never be based on that. I discussed this in the lecture on the good heart and compassion, but still, they can be helpful in accompanying our morality, Kant says. And if you harden your heart towards the animals, if you get used to abusing animals, you will probably also have no compassion towards humans. And likewise, Kant says that if you have a dog that served you well for many years, let's say as a hunting dog or as a guard's dog, but now the dog has grown old and weak and blind or whatever and cannot serve you anymore, and now you just throw the dog out or kill the dog, this betrays a small soul. And this means being ungrateful. And being ungrateful to Kant is one of the three devilish vices. When I get to Kant's anthropology, I will talk more about those, but it's one of the, in a way, most bad, most inhuman things possible. You are being ungrateful and you are throwing away your own humanity if you do that. And it also seems that Kant did not just think that you morally should treat the animals decently, but rather that he even thought that this could or maybe should be legally enforced. Because Kant likes to relate an anecdote from ancient Athens, where allegedly someone drove away his old donkey that had grown weak and useless. And the Athenians, this guy was taken to court, and the Athenians legally convicted him to having to take in his donkey again and having to take care of his donkey until it died. And Kant tells this anecdote, and he tells it approvingly. He seems to have approved of this. And he also says that if your, let's say your job, your profession is the killing of animals, namely, if your profession is hunting or butchering, you are once again stripping yourself of your humanity. He likes to mention that in England at the time, apparently, you could not be in the jury at court if you were a physician, a surgeon, or a butcher. The reasoning behind this being that they said those people are too used to blood and death, so they might take it lightly and might also lightly condemn someone to death. They might not take it seriously enough. And Kant often mentions this in lectures, and he seems to have approved of that. he also seems to have been of the opinion that the butcher, or maybe also the hunter, is too used to death and blood to even care about them when it comes to human beings. And Kant also says, for example, at one point in his lectures, the more one deals with the observation of animals and their behavior, the more one loves them, when one sees how much they take care of their young. Then one also can't sin cruelly against the wolf. And mind you, this was said back in the 18th century. Nowadays, we might have a different relationship with the wolf, because the wolf does not seem so threatening to us in our daily lives as civilized people, and as people where wolves have largely been eradicated in large parts of the Western world. But in Kant's day, the wolf was still seen as much more of a threat to animals and human beings. And I mean, just consider how, even decades after Kant's death in the 19th century, in Grimm's fairy tales, how the wolf is often depicted in fairy tales, and what the fate of the wolf is usually in such fairy tales. So Kant here is not just expressing compassion towards any animal, towards a loyal dog or a beloved cat or whatever, but even towards the wolf, this dangerous monster, this villain of the fairy tales. And Kant does also say that in light of the natural love and care that the animals show towards their own young, it is sheer barbarism to tear these young away from them. And he says that particularly if you study nature, if you look more closely at it, you will come to love the animals more and more, and therefore treat them with care and with softness. Because in general, Kant says, that which you look at closely, that which you study, that which you understand, you come to love. He likes to tell an anecdote of the philosopher and natural scientist Leibniz, who supposedly studied a little bug and was so amazed by what a miracle of nature that bug is, that he didn't just carelessly throw it away or squish it at the end, but carefully placed it back on its leaf. So you have many such general remarks of Kant's about animals. And also you have more specific stories told by, for example, acquaintances of Kant in the biographies they wrote, more specific stories about Kant and how he personally dealt with or felt about animals, particularly birds, it seems. So, for example, in his old age, in his last years, he apparently didn't care much about winter ending and spring coming back as such. Nature blooming and growing again didn't do much for him in those years. But there was one bird that would always return in spring to his garden, a typical warbler. And I had to look up the English name for this, but the German name is Grasmücke, which literally means grass mosquito. So I guess I'm in no position to make fun of the English name. But this warbler apparently made Kant very happy whenever it returned. And when after some years, one spring, it apparently didn't return, Kant was very sad about that. Also, Kant said that when the sparrows were singing their mating songs, he felt that the songs of those sparrows that got rejected sounded particularly melancholy, and it made him feel sorry for them, and it made him feel sympathy and compassion for them. And also, there's the story that one time he held a swallow in his hands, and he said that looking it in the eyes was like looking straight into heaven. So you see, it's not at all that Kant was completely dismissive of animals or completely careless towards them, saying, oh, they have no worth at all, you can do with them whatever you want, it doesn't matter if you cause them pain. If you hear anyone saying that based solely on Kant calling animals items or things, it just shows that he has misunderstood this term, and also that he has not studied Kant more extensively. I mean, here again, this is one of these issues that arise if you just read certain things about Kant, or maybe read Kant himself, but only a specific work like about moral philosophy. But if you don't take the time and soon as to study him deeper and more extensively, many of the things I just related are very unknown, and you will hardly ever hear them from others that talk about what Kant has to say about animals, because they are not exactly written in his main works on moral philosophy that are way more abstract. Rather, you will find such remarks in his lectures, or as I said, in biographies that his friends and acquaintances wrote about him after his death. So many people will simply not be aware of these remarks. These remarks should prove without doubt that Kant does not condone animal abuse. But they don't explain why he does not condone it. Indeed, one might ask now, how does this fit together with Kant saying animals are merely items without rights? Well, first of all, let me clarify that Kant says we can have moral duties in regards to something and towards something. And we only have moral duties towards human beings. So the duty to care for animals, to not abuse animals, is not a duty towards the animal. And if I abuse the animal, I'm not committing an injustice towards the animal. I'm not hurting the animal's rights, it has none. Rather, Kant says we can have duties in regards to something, but towards somebody else. Like, for example, when it comes to property, right? I have duties in regards to other people's property, duties not to destroy or to take their property, for example. But it is a duty towards them, not towards their property, right? If I burn down someone's house, I have not harmed the rights of the house, I have harmed the rights of the owner. So even the duties in regards to the animals are not duties towards the animals to Kant. And again, this is precisely where people will accuse him of anthropocentrism. And we live in an age where centrism of any kind is enough to dismiss someone, right? If you say this thinker is anthropocentric, or if you say this thinker is Eurocentric, for example, then this is enough to not engage with him anymore and not actually listen to his thoughts and his arguments and so on, which is, of course, very cheap. But no, if someone thinks that Kant is anthropocentric, that shows a fundamental misunderstanding of Kant's whole moral philosophy. Because If anything, Kant is not anthropocentric, he's ratiocentric. It is reason that is in the center of Kant's moral philosophy. Because Kant is not saying that human beings, as in the biological species Homo sapiens, have somehow more importance or more rights than other animal species. I mean, indeed, that would be not just wrong, it would be silly. On what argument would you base that? And it would also sound very suspicious when it's coming from someone who belongs to that very species, Homo sapiens. But no, what Kant is saying is that rational beings have more worth than other beings. This would apply also to rational aliens or to angels, spiritual beings, if such exist. And this might sound like just a technicality that comes down to the same thing, but it is very, very different. Because, as I said before, Kant distinguished the homo phenomenon, so the human as a sensual being appearing in the sensual world, and the homo noumenon, the human being as he is in himself, as a rational, autonomous being. And the homo phenomenon, I mean, that would be the animal species Homo sapiens, has no inner worth. Not any more than any other animal species. What has worth, what has a special dignity that must be preserved and revered, is this homo noumenon, this autonomy and rationality of ours. And this is not arbitrary. I mean, you could think, and there are people, superficial people, that say this. You could say, oh, why would we place rationality in the center of morality? Why should it matter whether a being is rational or not? Why not place sentience in the center of morality? Why not make it about who can feel or not feel pain? Well, because we are talking about value here. And the point is, morality is about that which has a value in itself, right? Not just a value for something else. That would be the useful, right? A hammer has value because I want to drive a nail into the wall. The nail has value because I want to hang up a picture. But if I don't care about the picture or about a nail, then the hammer is worthless for me. It has only a dependent value. But in morality, it must be something about something that has value in itself, not value for something else. And that obviously can only be a being which is capable of giving things value, a being which can think about values, which only a rational being can. Such a being has value in itself because without it, if all rational beings vanished, if you imagine a universe by all means populated by animals that can feel but without anything that can think, then that universe would be literally without value because no one would ascribe values to anything. Or you can use the word purpose, which is what Kant would do, which is such an important word in Kant's philosophy. Rational beings that have autonomy can set a purpose. And therefore, they alone are a purpose in themselves. Because they are needed in order for they to even be purposes in the universe. If all rational beings vanished, then the whole universe would be, once again, literally without purpose. because no one would give a purpose to anything. So that is why reason is in the center, because only reason can judge, only reason can even talk about something being or not being in the center. I mean, people can say as much as they want, oh, why should reason matter? What should matter is that you can feel pain. But how are they saying that? That is, what they are saying is a thought. They thought about this. They are saying this with their reason. They are talking about a should, not about an I want. Like a being that has no reason but can feel pain can say, I don't want to feel this pain. I want it to stop. But it cannot say that something should or should not be the case. So as soon as you talk about morality, even if you talk about a wrong morality, and a morality based on feeling is necessarily a wrong morality, as I showed in previous lectures, then you are using reason. So you can say morality should not be about reason, it should be about being able to feel pain. But a being that can feel pain but has no reason cannot say that. You can claim this being should be treated as a purpose in itself, but this being itself cannot say so, does not see itself as a purpose. Because once again, only you as a rational being can think about purposes. That is why without you, there would be no purposes, which again is why you alone are a purpose in yourself. I mean, that is the great discovery of Kant and the great genius of his moral philosophy. That is why alone his moral philosophy is not arbitrary. Any other one would be. I mean, you can say that, of course, once there are beings in the world that can feel pain and pleasure, then it is understandable that these beings, since they already do find themselves existing, would rather exist in a state of pleasure than in a state of pain. But that does not answer the question even why we should give them pleasure and not pain. And it certainly does not answer the question, why should such beings exist at all? Again, once they do exist, of course, they want to exist in a pleasurable state. But if they didn't exist, if they had never been created, then they would also not feel displeasure, and not existing, they would not mind not existing, right? So what worse even is there to feeling beings existing? None. Unless these beings have worse for other beings. Not worse in themselves, but worse for others that can use them for riding, for pulling carts, for their wool or whatever. And these other beings must be rational beings that can even talk about worth and about something having a worth in itself. I mean, this is the whole reason why Kant also does not require God for his moral philosophy. Right? Even nowadays, you will have many people thinking you can only have an absolute morality if you have God. The theists will claim this is why you need God, why the atheist cannot be moral. And others, atheists, will claim that indeed there is no absolute morality. There's just a relative morality, just what we as human beings like and would wish from each other. But in fact, a morality based on God would not be absolute, it would be completely arbitrary. I mean, you can, of course, claim, and that would really make you anthropocentric, you can claim that the human being is in the center of the universe because God created him as such, and God created everything else just for the human being. Just God created animals, for example, just to be eaten by human beings. You can claim that. But apart from the fact that you will have a hard time proving that this God even exists, let's say we could prove that there is a creator God. What, apart from understandably being prejudiced in our own favor, what would make us think that the universe was created specifically for us? That we would specifically matter to this God? You could just as well claim that the mosquito is in the center of the universe and that God created everything else just for the mosquito, including us, just to provide blood for the mosquitoes to suck on. Well, Kant does not have such problems, because Kant can say only we can think about purposes, only we can think about value, therefore only we have a purpose, have a value in ourselves. Again, this is not anthropocentrism, this is ratiocentrism. Not the human being in the biological sense is in the center, but rather the purpose itself is in the center. Freedom, the ability to even set a purpose, is in the center, and because it is the ability to set a purpose, it mustn't be used as a means to achieve other purposes, but it must be a purpose in itself, because without it there would be no purpose. Now, the question remains, even if Kant cannot be accused of anthropocentrism, still, why would he say that we have duties, if not towards the animals, then at least in regards to the animal? Towards whom are these duties then? Well, they must be duties towards human beings, of course. But the specific answer to the question, why not abuse animals, why take care of animals, admittedly is a bit weak in Kant, or a bit unclear. And this comes down to the usual problem that I already addressed in several previous lectures, that Kant's philosophy is very true and very revolutionary for the most part in its principles. But when it comes to the application, Kant always falls short. And Kant often falls short, and Kant often stays behind his own philosophy and is not entirely consistent. So often Kant will give one reason not to abuse animals, and that is that he says this is a duty towards other people at the end of the day. Because if I do abuse animals, I will harden my heart, I will cultivate cruelty instead of compassion in myself, and this will also lead to me treating others accordingly. Since I want to keep my heart open and feeling for other human beings, since I want to be compassionate and sympathetic towards them, I should cultivate this even in the way I treat animals. This is an argument I already alluded to when I said we should, according to Kant, we should take care that children don't abuse animals. Or when I said that, according to Kant, the hunter, the butcher, strips himself of his humanity. Or when I said that Kant approves of the English not admitting, amongst other people, the butchers to jury because they might lightly and carelessly condemn someone to death, being having grown so accustomed to death and blood. But of course, this would mean that not only do we not care for the animals for their own sake, we care for the animals simply because we treat them as means to an end. The end being our fellow human beings. And I think Kant does have a point here, of course. If you do get used to cruelty towards animals, you will also be less compassionate towards human beings. So he does have a point, but this should not be the main reason to not abuse animals. This is more like an added bonus. If we take care of animals, we also cultivate our compassion. And unfortunately, most of the times when you find Kant's morality in regards to animals discussed, the only reason why you shouldn't abuse them, according to Kant, that is usually discussed, that people are usually aware of, is this reason. Which is also because Kant simply sometimes doesn't give any other reason. Sometimes he only gives this reason. So if someone reads a respective passage, you cannot blame him necessarily for thinking that is Kant's only reason. And rightfully, this gets criticized as just treating the animals as a means for other human beings, and this gets criticized also as being a rather weak reason in itself. So I don't have to get into that criticism because it's pretty clear, and also it is correct. But here Kant is speaking from the perspective of lower morality. It was Fichte who distinguished between a lower and a higher morality. And there are some instances, so you have to properly look for them to find them. There are some instances in Kant where, when it comes to animals, he assumes the standpoint of a higher morality and gives a more proper answer why we should care for the animals. And here it is not a duty towards our fellow human beings, it is a duty towards ourselves. What these duties are specifically about, what this means, how you can have a duty towards yourself, I discussed in its own lecture. And I also said there that these, to Kant, are even the most important duties. This is, of course, very alien to our time. Our time, first of all, doesn't know any morality at all. It is very relativistic. And if we talk about some sort of morality, then it is usually feeling based. It is usually compassion based, which is the very reason why it might include animals, not just humans. But which, of course, is also the reason why it is only about others. Why it is about how you treat other human beings or maybe animals, but never about how you treat yourself. Our current day liberal compassion morality would think that you can treat yourself however you want. You are your own property and can do with yourself whatever you want. While to Kant, morality, after all, is about the dignity of humanity. And you mustn't hurt this dignity in others, but also not in yourself. So how you treat animals is about your own humanity. You owe it to your own humanity, to yourself being a rational being, to always act as a rational being, to always act with dignity. But surely to abuse animals just for the sake of it, to be careless or even actively malicious, to take pleasure into causing harm and suffering is not dignified. Surely it is not befitting a rational being to occupy his time with, say, tearing off the legs of a fly. So that is why we should not abuse animals, because we should act as humans, not as monsters or wild beasts or whatever. So just imagine a perfect human being. Imagine a human being not as they are, as you find them in the world, but as they should be. Imagine someone who's truly holy. Imagine the sort of human being that a good, a holy God would want us to be. Indeed, imagine the sort of human being that God would have had in mind as a sort of template when creating the human beings, the humanity that was in God's mind. This human being would be what Kant calls the ideal of the God-pleasing humanity. I gave a lecture about that, the ideal of holiness. And at least if you are Christ, then you would believe that Jesus fit this ideal. And Kant would say that indeed we can say that this ideal, not necessarily the historical specific human being Jesus of Nazareth, that is a matter of your personal belief, but this ideal of the God well-pleasing humanity, Kant says, can be called the Son of God, that was with God from the beginning and is therefore uncreated. Because God, from the very beginning, because in God there's no change, would have in his mind this ideal of what a human being should be like, and would then create humans in the image of this ideal, so of himself. So imagine a truly holy person, the ideal of the God well-pleasing humanity. Imagine a Jesus, if you want. I ask you, can you imagine someone like that abusing animals? Can you imagine someone like that whipping a horse bloody so that it runs faster? Or can you someone like that having fun at abusing, torturing a small animal to death? No, you cannot. No matter how good, how holy that person would be in how he deals with his fellow human beings. If we were to abuse animals, we would not say that he is truly, utterly perfect. It simply does not fit in our minds with our own rationality, with our own dignity, our own humanity, to abuse animals. So that would be the proper reason from Kant's morality why you should treat animals properly. Because your humanity demands it. And as a side note, the duties towards yourself are not just the most important moral duties, on which even the duties towards other people depend, but Kant also says that often people think that what is a duty towards themselves is a duty towards others. And that's the case here, right? People may think that they have duties towards the animals when it's a duty towards themselves. That's the same in other cases. For example, I had a conversation a while ago with a friend of mine because a girl was interested in him and very clearly expressed that, but she had a boyfriend. And so he asked me if I had sex with her. making her cheat on her boyfriend with me, would that be moral? Or wouldn't I be acting shitty towards the boyfriend? And my answer was that it would not be moral, but not so much because you are doing an injustice towards the boyfriend. She might be doing that. I mean, she's in the relationship, she's cheating. But you are single. You are not the one cheating. You are not the one, in that sense, betraying her boyfriend. But you're betraying yourself. If you have any dignity as a human being and don't just think with your dick, then you will not engage in such a situation. Then you will not be involved with this cheating, even if you are not the one cheating. So, again, often we think something that might be a duty first and foremost towards ourselves is a duty towards others. A main example in Kant would be lying. And I gave a whole lecture about why we shouldn't lie, not even to save a life. Many misunderstand Kant here because they think it's a duty towards others to tell them the truth. But Kant clearly says, I mean, yes, we also do an injustice to others if we lie to them, but that is secondary. And especially when we are lying to someone evil, when we are lying to someone who wants to murder, for example, he certainly cannot complain about an injustice being done to him. No, rather, we are, by lying, by making our own speech that should be rational, senseless, we are doing an injustice to ourselves. Now, I'm aware that I live in an age that is an age of irrationalism, so an age that does not believe in reason, and therefore an age that has little sense for dignity and humanity as such. And such an age might dismiss Kant's argument or might not understand Kant's argument, why we shouldn't abuse the animals for our own sake. But I would claim that if you do care about animals, then you indeed care for this reason, even if you are not fully aware of it. I mean, that is what Aufklärung is about. It's in the word, becoming more clear. So the more you clear yourself off, the more you will get clarity over your own principles, over your own reasons. So it falls to the philosopher, as the more aufklärt person, to understand people better than they understand themselves. So many people that care about animals, I would claim, misunderstand themselves. So if you ask them, for example, why don't you eat animals? They will reply with, because I don't want animals to suffer. I don't want animals to die. So seemingly making it about feeling. But I would claim that is not their real reason. Because think about it. What do they really want? What they want is that no animal has to die and suffer for them. They want to not eat animals. And maybe it's not just about them, it's about humans in general. So maybe someone tries to convince others to become vegetarian or vegan, and would ideally want a world where no human eats animals. But even in such a world, animals will constantly suffer every day on Earth, right? Even if humans don't eat animals, other animals eat animals. And no one thinks about ending that. I mean, it could not even be stopped, right? You can imagine a world where humans don't kill each other, where there are no wars. Maybe it's unlikely to get there, but it's not impossible by the laws of nature. But a world where no animal eats other animals would be impossible. Then the predators would, of course, all starve and die. So, um, even if you do care about animals, you cannot even want this. Precisely because you care about them, because you don't want all the predators to starve. And likewise, when it comes to human beings, we of course don't just care about them not suffering because of us or because of other human beings. We care about them in general, right? So if you're a good person, of course, you don't want to murder anyone. You also want others not to murder anyone. You want to end wars, for example. You want to bring world peace. Um, but also, you would not be content even if there was world peace, but people were still dying from some illness or from natural catastrophes like earthquakes or floods or whatever. But rather, as a good person, you would wish for that to be ended too. For medicine to advance, to be able to cure all illnesses, or for our technology to advance to, for example, build better dams against the floods and so on. And this is something that you would do when it comes to humans, but not when it comes to animals. So, if as a good person you hear that there's a village of humans that regularly get attacked, not by other humans, but by lions, you would still want to help and prevent that. You would help maybe building a fence around the village. But knowing that animals are suffering and dying because of illness, natural catastrophes, or other animals for that matter, um, is not such an issue. It's just an issue that they die because of humans. It's that we want to end if we are good, which shows that really we do not want to protect the animals as such, but rather we want human beings to be better. Someone might disagree here and say, no, wait a second. I would also intervene if an animal suffers because of other animals. Like maybe you own a cat that sometimes brings you mice or little birds that are still alive, and you save those from the cat instead of letting the cat kill them. So you are saying, or maybe you see a stray dog that is starving and you would give it food. So it seems that you do help the animal, um, even if it's not a human being that is threatening the animal, but rather if the animal is threatened by part of nature. But to that I would reply, okay, fair enough, but you are intervening here where you are present. It may not be a human being that is hurting the animal, but the animal is being hurt in the presence of a human being, and a human being is able to help, and then you help. So again, it is about you being good, but it is not simply about the welfare of the animal as such. It is not about the welfare of all animals, but just of the animals you are dealing with. Because you might be saving mice from your cat, but you're probably not going on a crusade to save all the mice in the world from all the cats and from all the foxes and all the owls and all the falcons and so on. And even if you were, then you would not be helping all the animals. You would just be helping the mice and condemning the foxes and falcons and so on to starve. And to be clear here, with all of this, I'm not speaking as someone who doesn't care about animals. That's important for me to stress, right? Because again, there's this cliche, this prejudice that Kant didn't care about animals and that his whole moral philosophy is just dismissive of animals or basically allowing for animal abuse or at least not giving any fundament for protection of animals. And someone might have the suspicion that if someone agrees with Kant's moral philosophy and subscribes to it, maybe that person simply doesn't care about animals very much. Well, I probably care about animals more than most people. I don't eat animals, and I do help animals if I can. Even to a degree that many people would maybe find ridiculous. I mean, more than once in my life, I've saved a fly from a spider's web. And then I've spent up to 2 hours trying to disentangle the fly from that web carefully, which is really not that easy if you're trying to flee this fly without tearing off any legs or any wings. So it's certainly not that you can accuse me of simply agreeing with Kant because animals don't matter to me. Rather, you should ask yourself, how can somebody to whom animals matter that much agree with Kant? And the answer is because animals do matter to me, but that does not mean that I'm a sentimental fool and that I have no self-reflection about why they matter to me. Because, again, sure, I might be saving a fly from a spider's web, but when I hear that the fly is buzzing desperately because it got caught in that web, and then I look and I see the spider already approaching the fly, ready to kill it, but I'm just saving this specific fly that I happen to hear. I'm not destroying the web as a whole, and I'm not killing the spider. Very well aware that this will mean other flies eventually dying, even though I saved this one. Very well aware that it just so happened that I was present and heard this one buzzing in the web, but maybe tomorrow I may be out and about while another fly gets caught, and I will not be there to save it. And I didn't prevent that by destroying the web. But then if I did destroy all the spider webs, and again, I would maybe be helping the flies, but I would condemn the spiders to die. And this is just about what's happening in my apartment. But even if I removed all the spiders in my apartment, of course, there are billions upon billions of flies on Earth every day that are being eaten by spiders, and I'm pretty unfazed by that. It's not that this is that I'm caring about this as much as I'm caring about the fact that there are millions of humans that are dying on Earth in wars and famines and so on. So clearly, I am helping this fly not for its own sake, but for my sake, if I'm being honest with myself. And someone could be cynical here and say, oh, why are you helping the fly? That is nature, eat and be eaten. And you're only thinking of the fly, but the spider also wants to live, also wants to eat. To which I would reply, well, the spider can eat. I don't begrudge the spider her food. Again, I'm not destroying her web, I'm not killing her. The spider can eat, but it can eat the next fly that gets caught in the web when I'm not there. It cannot eat this fly. And why not this? Why the next one? Is this fly, does it have more value than the next one? No, the simple answer is because here I was present. Because here the divine providence, if you will, let me be present to save this fly. It did not let me be present to save the next fly. So, really, the point is just that when I hear the fly desperately and loudly buzzing in the web for minutes, desperately trying to get free, I cannot just sit by and ignore it. I cannot just shut off my heart and make myself deaf to that. I owe it to myself, to my own humanity, to intervene. And other people might not go as far as me, might not care about flies and spiders' webs. But the principle is the same. If, let's say, you go through the park and you see a little bird that fell out of its nest on the ground, and maybe you see some fox approaching from afar. If you drive the fox away and take the little bird and bring it to some shelter, which I think is something that, of course, not everyone, but many people would do, then again, why are you doing that? For the sake of saving the birds? You just saved this one bird. If you don't run after the fox and catch it or kill it, the fox will go on to eat other birds when you aren't there. And you know that. But this is not causing you sleepless nights, probably. Because it is not about saving birds in general. It is about the fact that you cannot live with yourself. You cannot be dignified in your own humanity if you just carelessly walk by while a helpless little thing is being eaten in your presence. You were here, you saw this, so you had to intervene. It's not about the bird, it's about you. Of course, one could dismiss all the arguments about why we should take care of animals and not abuse them as mere scholastics and say that what matters is the result. I mean, whether you come at it from a Kantian perspective and say you owe it yourself, it's a duty towards yourself, towards the dignity of your own humanity, to treat animals with care, or whether someone says you should have compassion with anything that can suffer and therefore treat animals with care, the result, the action that you should do is the same, no? Well, if you are a consequentialist, so someone who in morality does say it's only about the consequences, the results of the actions that matter, then indeed that should be all you care for. Now, consequentialism is wrong, very much so. And Kant has shown that, and I already gave a lecture about why morality is not about the consequences of our actions. But I'm saying if you are a consequentialist, then it should be enough for you that the animals are cared for, whatever reason someone might have to do it. And interestingly enough, people do seem to care. There are, as I already said, many people attacking Kant's morality on the basis that he does not give dignity to animals, that he calls animals items, and so on. And this is strikingly inconsistent for alleged consequentialists, which should be an indicator that this is about something else entirely, that these people themselves are not fully aware of. They claim to want to save the animals, but the animals are saved if we follow Kant. We don't have to follow morality of compassion if we want to save the animals. So it cannot be about that when they criticize Kant. Rather, my claim is they don't actually want to save the animals, they want to save their own animality. What these people actually are rejecting when it comes to Kant's morality is not saying this. It's not this morality saying that you can abuse animals, because this morality does not say that. It is this morality saying that as a human being, you have duties towards yourself, and as a human being, you have a certain dignity. That's what these people are rejecting. These people want to live as animals. They want to blindly follow their own desires, their own whims. Might not always be cruel desires, might be compassionate desires, but still they want to follow their whims. And they don't want to be self-critical or have self-discipline. They don't want to have to think about their actions and to live with dignity. They don't want to aufklären themselves and rise to true humanity. And for that reason, I would say our time is so obsessed with claiming that humans are different from animals only in degree but not in quality. We are also animals. There is no fundamental difference between us as rational beings and animals as merely sensual beings. And of course, if you want to go there, then the only sort of morality that can exist is a morality of compassion, is a morality that is just about the suffering sensual creature feeling sympathy for another suffering sensual creature. And of course, once you have such a morality, that sympathy cannot be limited to just humans, but must be extended to all sensual creatures that are capable of suffering. Kant's morality is a very sublime one. It is, to say it with Nietzsche, like he doesn't say this about Kant's morality, but he uses these terms, it is a noble morality. And our time likes to reject anything noble and sublime and high. Indeed, there's one passage of Nietzsche's that I think fits quite well here. Nietzsche is not actually talking about animals here when he is talking about the difference in rank. He is talking about different ranks between human beings. But still, I think it very much applies. Nietzsche says, "A morality of the ruling class, however, is more especially foreign and irritating to present-day taste in the sternness of its principle, that one has duties only to one's equals, that one may act towards beings of a lower rank, towards all that is foreign, just as seems good to one, or as the heart desires, and in any case, beyond good and evil. It is here that sympathy and similar sentiments can have a place. These people cannot imagine a morality where you do what is good not because you pity others, but because you honor and revere yourself. But this goes beyond Kant, so it was just a remark on the side. Um, if you want to not just understand Kant's moral philosophy, but understand why it makes certain kinds of people uneasy and is rejected by them, then you have to turn to thinkers that came after Kant, particularly Nietzsche. I want to stay with Kant for a bit longer. Because, again, someone could still think this is scholastics. What do I care? Why someone cares for animals, as long as they do care for animals. But in fact, this difference in foundation, caring for animals because you have pity for those who suffer, who can feel pain, or caring for animals because you have reverence for your own humanity, does not lead to the exact same actions. It leads to very different actions. Because a morality that is based on compassion with the suffering, of course, ends where suffering ends. And all other items of the world that cannot feel fall outside of that morality. So even when it comes to the plants, it's very questionable how much exactly can the plants feel pain. So do we have any duties towards the plants according to such a morality? But then if you move completely outside of the realm of living beings, if you consider lifeless objects, such a morality of compassion and pity would be completely careless towards them. Not so Kant. Kant says we should also treat lifeless objects properly. So, for example, he says with Jonathan Swift, if someone is shipwrecked and survives by clinging to a plank of wood and then gets to some shore, if that person is capable of immediately hacking that plank of wood to pieces without hesitation and using it for fire, feeling no sense of gratitude towards that wood that just saved his life, then he must have a very little soul and very little humanity. So while some people honestly think when they hear that Kant calls animals items, that Kant is okay with animal abuse, not only is Kant not okay with animal abuse, he's not even okay with treating a lifeless object like a piece of wood carelessly. That is how far his morality goes. And here you can see, of course, even more clearly that this is not about the object, right? We are, of course, not, if we are using this wood for fire immediately, we are, of course, not hurting the wood or doing an injustice to the wood. But we are acting as people that have no gratitude and no care. And that is not how we should be acting as human beings. If morality is based not on compassion for the suffering, but on our own humanity and our duty to act like proper human beings, act rationally, then that humanity has no limits at all. Then everything, even lifeless things, are included within morality. I mean, consider a person who had a beloved stuffy as a child and that stuffy accompanied that person everywhere and helped him falling asleep and so on. Okay, might be that he's a grown-up now. Might be that he does not need that stuffy anymore. But imagine if he just completely carelessly throws the stuffy away now. Has not the tiniest bit of sentimentality towards that stuffy. I would be sure that this cannot be a good person. Clearly, this is not about the stuffy as such. It's a lifeless object. It has no feelings. No injustice is done to the stuffy when it's thrown away. But this is about your own posture. This is about what kind of person you are. And here we get to a very important part of Kant's moral philosophy that, unfortunately, is pretty much never discussed. I don't know if there's any other video here on YouTube that would even mention it. I already alluded to it earlier on. People hear animals being called items, and then they think, oh, well, with an item I can be careless, an item I can destroy, like if I bash in my own car with a baseball bat, or if I take my own plate from the cupboard and smash it on the ground. That's not immoral. So if I do the same with my own animal, my own pet, then that's also not immoral according to Kant. That's what they think. But rather to Kant, it's the other way around. He would say it is immoral to destroy your own car or smash your own plate. And so therefore, even though they are just items, and so therefore it's also immoral to abuse an animal you own, even though it's just an item. Kant says we should not have what he calls the spirit of destruction. We should not be careless with the items of the world. And especially, we should not willfully destroy them. I mean, take something like a car. That car did not just fall from the sky to be yours. Rather, that car was produced. Time went into that car. Work went into that car. Resources went into that car. The environment was destroyed for producing that car. The least you can do is respect that and be careful with that and treat the car rationally. And again, being a rational being means being able to act purposefully. So you should use the car in a purposeful manner. The purpose of the car, for example, is to drive you somewhere where you can't get without the car. Okay. Maybe you can also find another purpose for the car. Maybe some night when you are on a trip and you are out in the wilds and there's no other place, it's also purposeful to sleep in the car. But to just willfully destroy the car for no reason, that is not a purposive action. And so therefore it is not a rational action and it is not befitting of a rational being. So no, you should not take your own plates and just smash them. And you cannot argue, well, I'm not smashing anyone else's plates. It's not like I'm harming someone else's property. No, but you are harming your own dignity. I mean, it's one thing if a child does this, but as an adult, you should be above taking pleasure in simply senselessly smashing things. And the point is, if you have this spirit of destruction, you cannot be a good person. You simply cannot. Our superficial morality that we have nowadays can say it as often as it wants. Oh, but you are not hurting anyone. How is it your concern? What I'm saying is, look not at specific isolated actions. Look at people's posture. And I ask you, if someone has this posture of destruction, can he be a good person? Think about it. Imagine people that you know. I just have to look back at my own school days. Even in elementary school, as a child, I was always careful. I rarely ever smashed anything. If I did, I was shocked, I felt sorry. But mostly I was careful. I was careful with my things too. I didn't usually lose my pencils or my school things or whatever. I had other classmates that were constantly losing stuff or accidentally breaking stuff. And also, they simply didn't take care of things. Like I would take care walking over a meadow not to step on the flowers. Others would just carelessly step over the flowers and trample them down. And looking back, me being like that as a child was the basis, was the fundament, was the so to say propensity for later adopting moral principles. While no one would be surprised, I would assume, to hear that those others that were more wild, more careless, more enjoying even willful destruction, enjoying to demolish a classroom when no teacher was there, that those at the same time were also the bullies. They didn't just mistreat things. Those same people that had no respect for things and for the work that went into things also had no respect for other people. And of course, also there is no clear limit between the two. I mean, consider, for example, I would lend things of mine to others. Like elementary school, I had lots of PlayStation games, and then someone would borrow one, and then I would get it back, and the disc was totally scratched, so that it was basically unusable. And this happened several times with different people until I learned my lesson to not just let anyone borrow my stuff, because I don't even know how this happens, to be honest. Like, it's not that they did this on purpose to mess with me. It's simply that they were so careless. But I couldn't be so careless if I wanted to. Like, I don't know how you scratch a disc like that. Like, I just take it out of the package, and then I just put it into the PlayStation, and then when I'm done, I take it out of the PlayStation again. Like, how can it be so stretched? But they somehow managed to do that because they were so uncaring. And of course, in this case, being uncaring with an object also directly meant being uncaring, being disregarding towards the owner of that object. And for more serious examples, you don't just have to think of little elementary school kids. I mean, think of what we could witness in the last over 2 years from the IGF soldiers who put their own war crimes online on Instagram, on TikTok, and so on. I mean, we have seen them willfully and full of glee demolishing the homes of Palestinians that they have driven away or that they have murdered, right? We have seen them simply kicking over a TV or taking a console and throwing it against the wall, even destroying medical equipment in a hospital, like massage devices for cancer patients. And I mean, even if they were looting these things, of course, this also happens. There are a lot of like Israeli women that post online about how their boyfriends or their brothers or whatever have bought them watches or cosmetics or whatever from Gaza. Different story. Looting, while of course also an evil and despicable act, it is still a little more dignified than this, because at least here you are still acting in a somewhat purposive manner. Of course, you're not acting towards the actual purpose of humanity, the moral purpose. You are just acting with instrumental reason. You're just doing something that benefits your lower desires. But still, at least it is somewhat purposive. At least you're acting somewhat like a rational being. If you steal a TV or a console to use them for yourself, but if you just smash them, just willful destruction, just this glee at being able to cause destruction, you are a human. Created, I mean, this goes especially for the IGF soldiers because it is their holy book that says this, created in the image of God. God is not the destroyer, He is the creator. So if you are a great artist, if you create a marvelous statue or a great piece of literature, that is divine, that is godlike. But if you destroy something, that is pathetic. And the reason why these images of these Israeli soldiers are so enraging is, of course, because if they treat objects like this, they treat people like this. And so what Kant is saying is we should treat the world and all the items in the world, including the animals, in a purposive manner. So he does explicitly say you should not destroy anything, even if to you it means nothing, anything that could be useful to others or that could be beautiful to others, that they could take delight in. So if you find something in nature, like let's say you find a tree, maybe you don't want to eat the fruits from that tree, or maybe you just want to eat one fruit and then you go on and never come back. If you cut down the whole tree just for fun or just for taking one fruit that you could also have plucked by climbing or whatever, you are an evil person. You might have no further use for the tree, but maybe a month later someone else would have come along who could have eaten the fruit or just enjoyed to look at the tree. So when Kant is accused of standing for an instrumental reason that endlessly and carelessly exploits nature nowadays, and for an anthropocentrism that thinks everything is there for our human desires, for our human whims, it is a very gross misunderstanding. Rather, you can think back to religious commandments. When the Bible says we are created in the image of God, does it not mean that we should behave godly, that we should behave divinely? And certainly that does not mean carelessly exploiting and destroying. That means acting with grace, acting with dignity, acting with reason. Yes, the Bible says God commands Adam to subdue the earth. God gives Adam dominion over everything over on earth. So to be sure, it's not simply that he's equal with all the animals. The animals, the earth are there for Adam. But that does not mean they are there just to be used and to be used up and to be thrown away, but rather it is like a king, a proper king should have dominion over his realm, not to just oppress and to rob his subjects, but to rule them wisely. You have the same in the Islamic tradition, right, where the human being is the Khalif, so the one to rule over earth in God's stead. The human being is the custodian of the earth. And likewise, you can say about Kant that surely he would not be for some environmentalism that is based on some romantic hippie concept of well, just leaving nature alone, nature being our equal, or nature having its own rights. No, he would say we can and we should use our reason to interact with nature and to form nature, to shape nature even in our rational image. But it should happen rationally. So it is one thing if you make a desert bloom. It is one thing if you take a swamp and turn it into a beautiful garden. That is subduing nature, having dominion over nature, but in a rational, in a divine manner. But if you just go and destroy it, turn it into a parking lot or tear it open to just get all the resources out of the ground, that is not acting like a dignified, rational being. And this is also what Kant ultimately says about the animals, right? So he's neither saying that you are allowed to abuse them, nor is he saying that you mustn't cause harm to them under any circumstances, but rather he would say it depends on how rational, how purposeful your action is. So just abusing an animal for the fun of it, of course, that's forbidden. That is throwing your own humanity away. Kant is not against eating animals. He himself was not a vegetarian, of course. And but what he does say, for example, is that you should not do senseless experiments with animals. It would be one thing to Kant if you made experiments that were really beneficial, like to curing some serious illness in humans, and if that knowledge you are acquiring could not be acquired in any other way. That's an important point because nowadays, often when researchers claim they need to do experiments on animals, and I have a friend who's a veterinarian who studied precisely this, who was doing a doctor's on precisely this topic on alternatives. In many cases where they claim they have to experiment on animals, it's just sheer laziness. There would be perfectly fine alternatives that would not harm animals. But Kant would say, if you cannot get this knowledge without harming an animal, and it is really valuable knowledge that really benefits human beings, that's one thing. But if the knowledge could be acquired another way, or if it's unimportant knowledge, or if you are just experimenting on animals again just for fun, that is not okay. So Kant would certainly not agree with us doing experiments on animals to test cosmetics. He would rather say, well, you can live without cosmetics. In fact, that would be a matter for another lecture, but we could discuss how much cosmetics, how much makeup can actually be justified in the face of human dignity. So for that, animals should not be made to suffer. And here I want to make another remark or another clarification about how Kant's moral philosophy here, unlike many others, allows for progress and for change in how we treat animals. Because Kant distinguishes, when it comes to morality, between narrow and wider duties. I've previously explained that in the lecture on the morality of love and the morality of right. And the narrow duties, they are more negative, and those you have to always follow in one specific manner, because it's clear what you have to do, or rather what you have not to do. Don't kill, don't rape, don't steal. The wider duties are about helping others, or about, when it comes to the duties towards yourself, perfecting your own humanity, right? The narrow duties would be about not harming the dignity of others or not throwing your own humanity away, but the wider ones would be about actually improving things. And here there's more room for your own judgment, right? So, for example, the wider duty would be help the poor. But what exactly does this mean specifically? Should you give money to the poor? If so, how much money? And to whom? Since you can probably not give money to all the poor on earth, who needs it most? Or maybe you can help by volunteering in a homeless shelter. Or maybe you can go into politics and try to change our politics so that we have a society where there are no poor. Because, to be quite frank, if they are poor in a society, they have been stolen from. They are only poor because others are rich. It is grotesque and perverse that billionaires are allowed to exist in a world where there's a single homeless person. And I don't see why we shouldn't give every homeless person the right, if he had the chance to do so, to murder every billionaire he sees. I mean, by what right would he say he's not allowed to do that? But that aside, the point is, this wider duty allows for your own judgment. The moral law just tells you what kind of action you have to undertake, but not what specific action. Well, and if you now ask, what sort of duties are the duties in regards to animals? I already said they are not duties towards other people, they are duties towards myself. But are they narrow or are they wider duties? I would say that at least partially they fall under the wider duties. You have a duty to treat animals with care. But what specifically does that mean? Does it mean, as Kant says, for example, you can eat animals, but they should be killed swiftly and as painlessly as possible? Or does it maybe mean, no, you should not kill animals to eat at all? And as I said, there could be progress here, there could be change here. Because maybe we can acknowledge that at some point it was necessary to eat animals. I mean, I don't know if our ancestors in the Stone Age would have survived if they had tried to be vegetarians or vegans and live completely without animals. And here you can clearly see, I mean, if you agree with this, And I would assume that most people agree, except maybe some very extreme vegans or whatever. Then you necessarily agree that eating animals cannot always be immoral. Because otherwise you would say that sometimes, or at some point in human history, it was not possible to be a perfectly moral, perfectly holy human being. Not just that there was no one like that, maybe there never was at no point in history, but that there could not have been someone like that. And then you would deny morality as such, because as Kant says, the ought implies the can. If the moral law tells me you ought to act so and so, then it also tells me you can act so and so. So you cannot say you ought not to kill animals, while at the same time saying, but you must kill animals. You cannot live without killing animals. So if our ancestors had to do this, maybe, then that would mean that back then it was not immoral under the given conditions. I mean, I would not judge a Stone Age person for having eaten an animal. I would judge a Stone Age person just like I would judge a person today for having killed someone, having murdered someone from his tribe. That would have been immoral even back then. But maybe as we progress, as our civilization and our culture progresses, and as our means of taking care for ourselves progress, so that we are able nowadays to feed ourselves without problem, without using animals, or so that we are able nowadays to clothe ourselves without having to use animal foods. You could also say that what the general moral demand to treat animals with care, to not abuse them mindlessly, to, okay, use them as items maybe, but only in a purposive manner, what that general demand of morality means may change with time. So at some point it might have meant kill the animal swiftly. At some point it might mean don't kill the animal at all. So maybe you could say, if I imagine once again the ideal of the God well-pleasing humanity, if I imagine completely holy people, and if I imagine a future utopian world where everyone is like that, doesn't matter if that will ever happen, but if I imagine that ideal, then that includes me imagining everyone being a vegetarian. So there is room for progress here. Kant himself may have eaten animals, but that does not mean that a vegetarian or a vegan would have to completely dismiss Kant's morality. And that Kant's morality does not possibly give a foundation to not eating animals. So, with that said, I want to stress that a general problem of the frankly quite shallow and superficial moral thinking of our day is that people think of morality as only being about isolated actions. So, yes, sure, if I murdered someone, that was immoral. But then when I sit at home alone and I choose to read this book or to watch that movie or to eat my bread with mustard or whatever, that is a morally irrelevant action, neither good nor bad. And this is a completely wrong way to look at morality, to isolate actions like that and to think that there are certain morally relevant actions, but the most of our actions at the most time of the day are morally irrelevant one way or another. No, morality is a posture. It is about the whole human being. It is, you either have the goodwill all the time or you don't. Either everything you do is guided by your goodness or it is guided by your evilness and selfishness. And this way of looking at morality as only being about certain isolated actions messes up our morality even when it comes to how we treat humans. Because far too many people think, oh, I don't murder anyone, I don't steal from anyone, I have manners, I always say please and thank you, and that's enough, that makes me a good person. When in fact it is about having reverence, having regard for every person's humanity and treating everyone in every second of the day with that regard. And likewise, this way of looking at morality very much messes up how we deal with the non-human world. Because at the most we think, okay, we should not cause suffering to animals who can feel suffering. But then otherwise we will be careless about items, thinking that it is morally irrelevant what we do with them, unless maybe they are owned by somebody else. With Kant, it turns out we actually have an answer to the environmental issues, to the climate emergency, to nature's exploitation of our day. Because with Kant we can say even how I treat items matters morally. Not to them, but it matters for my own humanity. I should be true to my nature as a rational being. I should live up to what a rational being can be and should be. Again, when I own an item, like many people are so careless with it, if they manage to break their car or break their phone, the only reason they will mind at all is because a new one will cost money. But otherwise, they don't mind if one item is thrown away and replaced with a new one, right? And that is why we consume so much and why we, like, for example, fast fashion, we buy new clothes and then carelessly throw them away again. And someone who truly, not just superficially, how it is usually explained and talked, but truly, how it is truly meant by Kant, who truly lived according to Kant's morality, who truly followed the moral law that told him live with dignity, live with rationality, someone like that would treat nature with care. Does not mean he would leave nature alone altogether, does not mean he would not shape nature, but he would only do so with care and in rational manner for rational purposes. And if everyone acted like that, then we would not be in a climate emergency. But with that, I am done for real now, talking about Kant's moral philosophy. I'm not done altogether with everything that could be considered practical philosophy, because I want to spend a few more lectures talking about happiness and the good life. Because while Kant's whole moral philosophy is about stressing that this does not come first, our moral duty comes first, he's not saying that we should reject happiness or that we should not seek happiness. And he does indeed say how we can find happiness. So this I want to discuss in a few lectures, before then turning to Kant's philosophy of religion. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Leo Allmann, Cenku Bilay Altu, Thomas Doringer, Kim Giamatti, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Ökobong, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Spendierhosenträger, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.